Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear friends. Welcome to this session of Character Counts. As you are now becoming used to these sessions, I hope you do enjoy these sessions, not because you always agree with the content, but because perhaps they leave you with some food for thought, and you don't have to agree with everything that is said here. But at the same time, it would be very good if you could share your opinions, share your thoughts, even if they critique a view which is presented here, because the purpose is not to make other people agree to a viewpoint, but the purpose, in fact, is that people engage in dialogue, they engage in discussion, they have this freedom to speak whatever they have in mind, and there's no such thing as a taboo question. When you are in this session, you can discuss anything that you have in mind, and the purpose, as I said, is to engage all of us, especially people like you who are up and coming, in all sorts of discussions that you might think might be useful for you. You'd like to brainstorm a lot of things, you would like to thrash out a lot of things. So I hope you're getting used to these sessions in the way that but the primary aim of these sessions is to open up this closed door of dialogue, which has been closed for a very long period of time, especially between parents and their young adults, the next generation. Similarly, there are other things as well which at times hamper our quest for the truth. But let not this hampering in any way stop you in any way from pursuing this cause for the truth, because ultimately it is this pursuit, this effort, this struggle which counts. So starting off today's session with our first topic, and if I recall correctly, the first segment is about the rule of law. So the reason that I placed this topic or this very important discussion point here is that I wanted to make this point and underscore this, that as far as the rule of law is concerned, obviously as citizens of a country, as people who have on oath given their word that they'll follow the constitution of their country, the laws of their country, we are bound by that oath to follow the law of the laws of a country. But there is one step more that I needed to explain before you, and that is, according to the Quran, it's not just a civic duty to follow the law. It's not just a duty of a citizen. The Quran says it is your religious duty as well to follow the law of the land. So you see, the important thing here is that following the law of the land, following the rule of law, is not just merely something which is specific to the laws of a country, and because you're a good citizen you should follow them. The Quran has elevated the status of this by saying that following the law of your country is your religious duty, it is your Islamic duty. And at one point in Surah Nisa it says, Atiullaha wa atiur Rasul wa ulul amri minkum, which translates to the effect that the ulul amr, the people who are governing this country, the laws that they pass and the legislation that they make, that must be followed at all cost. So you see, it's not just a small thing that when you deviate from a law, when you break a law, when you cause a breach in law, remember that it's not just a civic law or a law of the country that you're breaking, you are also breaking your word given to God. I think this is a very important point that we must understand, and very small things which constitute the breach of law, we must be very careful in them. For example, the traffic laws. Although traffic laws are generally followed all over the world, but in many third world countries this is not the case. So when you drive within the speed limit, you are actually following what God has told you. And when you don't text while driving, you are actually following the law and also following what God has told you. Similarly, if you indulge in any activity which is contrary to what you think is, or I can rephrase this by saying that if you think that there is a clash between the law of the land and between your own beliefs, for example, if you're a Muslim living in a non-Muslim country, if there is a clash, if you think, although to my knowledge I have been studying various laws all over the world, in various countries enforced, and have seldom, I have yet to find a law which is adverse to the law that we are required to follow as Muslims. Is very, very, it's negligible. I cannot cite an example off my head even now. But for example, if there is such a breach, if there is a clash, if a person thinks that there is a clash, for example, we know that in France, the hijab became a very hot issue of discussion, and the French government has banned the hijab for in public places and in jobs and in all sorts of outdoor activities. So this could be a case then when a woman thinks that she has been deprived of her basic rights, and obviously this would be no less than persecution from the state itself. But breaching the law in this case again is not something which would be prescribed. You negotiate with the authorities, you tell them that it's your right, you tell them, I'm talking about those women who believe that hijab is compulsory for them. So for them, if it is a point of make and break, so instead of violating the law, they could negotiate, they could suffer this persecution, and hopefully God will forgive them. But breaking the law in order to cause anarchy or disorder in the land, that is something which is not on. That should not be the case. So I'm talking specifically because we Muslims think that the law of religion is always superior to the law of the land. And whereas religion itself says that you follow the law of the land, and if there is a clash between your religion and and the law of the land, then you better migrate from that country. Just leave that country, because you cannot live in a country and at the same time break the law of that country as well. So I'll give you a couple of more examples which will perhaps make this matter even more clear. In the US and in Canada, in Australia, we have this monogamy, this law in force in which a person cannot marry more than once. He can just keep one wife. But Muslims, they think that because they are allowed to have more than one wife, so what happens is that they end up at times breaking the law of the land and signing up a nikah nama or a marriage contract privately without registering it in the state authorities, and the plea that they give is that this is something which is sanctioned by their own religion, and if they follow their religion and break the law of that country, it would be just fine, without realizing that this is absolutely not fine at all, because as I said, you have to follow the law of your land. And remember that religion allows you or permits you in certain circumstances to marry more than once, but it never makes it an obligation on you. So we have to make this distinction as well, that there is no obligation of marrying more than once. So if a man thinks that he has to marry more than once, instead of hoodwinking the law, instead of bypassing the law, they should not do this and respect the law. If they have to marry more than once, then they must leave that country and do whatever they like outside that country. But the law of that country has to be respected. Another example that I'd like to give you here is that cousin marriages are also prohibited in the US, in Canada, in many Commonwealth countries. And here again, Muslims, I have found them violating the law, because they think that cousin marriages are allowed between the families, and because Islam allows them, therefore if they marry their cousins without bringing it to the notice of the authorities, it is perfectly fine. Again, this is something which is totally unacceptable. You just cannot bypass the law, and this happens in the US, as is the first case. I've seen that happening so many times, in which people marry more than one lady, and they give this excuse that because their own religion allows them to do, therefore it's just okay for them to break the law. And these cousin marriages also, I've witnessed them, and I can see people justifying them and breaking the law. Again, I would say that this is something which is absolutely unacceptable. You either follow the law in letter and spirit, or you put your case in front of the authorities, you argue for your case, you argue for some rights, maybe some exception. But if that is not granted, you just cannot break the law. The proper course would be either to follow the law or to just leave that country. But breaking that law is just not an option. And I do remember one incident from my university life many years ago, maybe 30 years ago. It's a very interesting incident which happened. So we were graduating. I graduated as an electrical engineer many years ago, and I had this one of my friends who went to Tokyo, actually to Japan, to do his degree, to do his advanced studies in his engineering. So one fine morning, it was Eid day, maybe a day after Eid, that I received an email. And in those times, emails were very, I mean, they were had just started, and we were not very used to these things. But I received this email. I opened up my email and I saw my friend saying this to me, that, well, in Tokyo, we are prohibited to pray Eid in public places. And what we did is that we hired a gymnasium. We, all of us, men and women, we booked that gymnasium for about 4 hours or 5 hours or maybe the whole day, and we pretended as if we are going to do some exercise in the gym, and we did pick up some weights and pretended that we were exercising, but our purpose was to have that Eid gathering and that Eid prayer celebrated or offered in that gymnasium. And he was doing this with a lot of, he was very proud to, announce this to me. And I was really taken aback. And just to give you this example, that even such thing as an Eid prayer, if you are not being allowed Eid prayer in an open space, you will have an excuse to offer to the Almighty. But this is certainly not on, as my friend did many years ago, that they hired a gym, they hoodwinked the gym authorities and made them believe as if they're doing that some exercise, and they did some exercise actually, but immediately after 5 or 10 minutes of going through the motions, they offered that Eid prayer. So this is something which we have to follow in letter and spirit. And remember, traffic laws, tax laws, all kinds of laws that you live in a country and you follow, they have to be followed at all costs. You must not think that this is a very ordinary matter. And finally, let me give you an example from the life of the Prophet as well. And you'll understand how the Prophet himself was so very careful and very strict that laws must be followed. So it happened in the times of the Prophet that one of his companions once came to him and said that, "O Prophet, if I find my wife in a compromising position with some stranger, I would be very annoyed and I would just chop off the head of that person. So would that be okay?" The Prophet is reported to have remained silent, and the companion asked it twice and then thrice. On the first two occasions, the Prophet was again very silent, and one could see, as has been reported, that he was getting uncomfortable and angry as well. And the third time the companion asked the same question, he said that, "Ana aghyaru, wallahu aghyaru minni wa ana aghyaru minka." God has more honor than me, and I have more honor than you. The law must take its course, meaning that the law must be followed. You just cannot chop off the head of a person when, even if you think that he is in a compromising position with a woman, you have to report that case. So you see, a person cannot be more inflamed, a person cannot be more angry than when he sees his wife with a stranger in a compromising position. Even then, look what your Prophet said, that even then you cannot start hitting that person or breaking his neck or killing him. You have to report the matter to the authorities. You can't disentangle it, but if you want to take an evasive action, it has to be through the law. So such is the sanctity of the law that we are required to respect. And I think that this is an object lesson for all of us, especially people living in the third world countries, that following the law, the writ of the law, is so essential that perhaps we don't realize when we break the law that how big a sin that we are doing in the eyes of God. So let's move on to the next segment, my dear friends, and the next segment relates to a question to the life regarding the life of the Prophet, and it's often an objection which is put forth by not only non-Muslims or friends, but even Muslims themselves, and they withhold this question. They feel ashamed, they feel embarrassed in answering this question, or maybe they just evade this question, and that is the age of Hazrat Aisha radhiyallahu anha, who is the wife of the Prophet, because it is alleged that she was 9 years old when the Prophet married her. And we have all kinds of objections and criticism from people within us and people outside us, but at times, as I said, the criticism is toned down. At times it is not even expressed because people think that this would be besmearing the person of the Prophet, and they are afraid to ask this question. They are even afraid to raise this question, and I've seen people evading this question whenever some non-Muslim friend of ours asks it. In fact, what happens is that we become angry, and instead of maybe trying to reply, what we do is that we become aggressive, and we tick off that person who has asked the question. So let me try to answer this question. That first of all, it is an absolutely erroneous statement that the Prophet's wife Ayesha, or would-be wife Ayesha, was 9 years old at the time of her marriage. It is an absolute, it's a blatant misconception, and it is so rampant that every Muslim believes this, that it happened when she was 9 years old, and the reason that they give to accept this is that, well, in those tribal times, marrying off young girls prematurely or before they reach their age of puberty was a very common thing, and therefore this is because it was acceptable in those times, therefore we should not object something which was acceptable in those times. So here again, let me just give you a small calculation which will let us know, which will explain how wrong we have been, because of the fact that there is a narrative which has been reported in the Sahih of Imam Bukhari. Al-Jami' Sahih of Bukhari is regarded to be a very authentic collection of narratives from the Prophet. Obviously, it is a very sound collection, but remember, it is a human endeavor, and in spite of being in a book as reputed as Bukhari, it still cannot be, any report cannot be absolved of any flaws in case there are flaws. So just being recorded in a book which is of high repute does not guarantee that what is written and recorded has to be correct all the time. So see, in order to know what exactly happened, let me explain this, that when the Prophet married, he was 25 years old, we know that, and Hazrat Khadija, his first wife, who was a widow, she was 40 years old. So for almost 20 years the Prophet was married to Khadija, and she remained his wife for a very long time, and there was no question of a second marriage. When she died, the Prophet had 6 or 7 young children from her, which were young at that time and needed attention. So the Prophet, he would remain engrossed in his thoughts and often look very speculative and very deep in thought. When one of the ladies came to him, and this lady is supposed to be a person who generally go to people to marry off various people, as we have ladies today, that they would bring proposals and make this task of matchmaking easier. So she came to the Prophet and said that, well, you look so sad, why don't you marry again? And the Prophet never said yes or no. He said, why do you say that? And she said that, well, you have young children, and since you have young children, it's all the more better that you have someone to look after them. And the Prophet said, okay, if you say so, then is there some proposal that you have? And she said, yes, I have 2 proposals, and one is an elderly lady and one is a young lady. So and the word she used for that, of course, was a word in Arabic which signifies a reasonably old lady. It's a young adult, as I said, close to 18 or 20 years of age. So she said that I have both a virgin, which is unmarried, and I have someone who is an old elderly person as well. So she was referring to Sauda, who was the elderly person, and the young person was Ayesha. So the Prophet said, okay, you can just make a move. And what happened is that so she went to Sauda first, the elderly lady, and she went to Ayesha, she was the daughter of Abu Bakr first, and she actually asked him that if she was available for marriage. And Abu Bakr said, well, my daughter is already engaged to another person, and that engage has prolonged. It has taken a lot of time, and just let me go and ask them whether she is still available for that matter or not, or whether they're interested or not. So Khala was the name of that lady who had brought that proposal. She left Ayesha thinking that, she left Abu Bakr's company thinking that this would not go on. This is unlikely because she's already engaged to someone. So remember, she was already engaged. And then she went to Sauda, who accepted the proposal. And when she came back, Abu Bakr once again contacted her and said, well, Aisha is also available. And now, of course, Khala, the lady who was the intermediary, was in a bit of a quandary because she thought that she would just ask one of them. And because of the fact that she had gone to both houses and ultimately both proposals got accepted, so she was slightly taken aback, and she went back to the Prophet and she said that she had given her word to both of them. And therefore the Prophet said, okay, if that is the case, then I'll have to honor that. But this is just the background that I was just talking about earlier on. The actual age of Aisha when she was married off to the Prophet, now I'm going to now come to that point. The previous point I was making was just to bring you in the picture that as far as the marriages of the Prophet are concerned, they were if the first marriage, of course, with Khadija was something which is of a natural phenomena. Person would like to marry, always marries the first time, and that marriage lasted for a better part of the Prophet's middle ages, and only after the death of his first wife, and he had no intention of marrying again. It was at the suggestion of a third party, that he started to think, and this then happened that two proposals got accepted at the same time. So as far as the age of Aisha is concerned, now our history books tell us that one of the sisters of Aisha is Asma. So Asma was 10 years older to Aisha. So keep this point in mind. Asma, the sister of Aisha, was 10 years older to her. Now our history books also mention that Asma died at the age of 100. She lived a very long age. So she lived till the age of 100, and she died when in 73 Hijrah, which is the 73 years after the Prophet's migration. So she was 100 years old at the year 73 Hijrah, which automatically tells us that when migration took place, Asma, of course, would be 100 minus 27, 100 minus 73, 27. So at the time of migration, Asma would be 27. And remember, Aisha is 10 years younger to her. So at the time of migration, if Asma was 27, then Aisha would be 17. And we know that before migration to Medina, the Prophet had his nikah with Aisha, and it was not consummated until after 2 or 3 years, until he had actually gone to Medina. So if you add 2 or 3 years to 17, it makes 19 or 20. So it is as simple as that Aisha was 19 or 20 years old at the time of her marriage. It is absolutely erroneous to believe that she was 9 years old, as some narratives do mention. They belie history, and they also belie this common sense that why would the Prophet marry a young lady, a young girl, when his own children were as old as that girl? What was the purpose of marrying her off? So as I said, that this never happened, and Aisha was assumingly already engaged to the son of Mut'im, a famous person of the Jahiliyyah period, and he said that Abu Bakr said, I'll go and ask him whether they are still interested. Obviously, the word that she used in that case for a person of the stature of Aisha was the word which is generally used for women or ladies who are 18 or 19 years old. So this also tells us that she couldn't have been 9 years old. And above all, as I said, this historical calculation is sufficient to make us understand that she was 19. Again, just a small recap, that Asma, her sister, was 100 years old in 73 Hijrah. Okay, so that would mean that she would be 27 at the time of Hijrah. Correct? 100 minus 73 is 27. And if she was 27 at the time of Hijrah, then Aisha obviously must be 10 years younger. She would be 17. So at the time of Hijrah, if Aisha was 7, when the Prophet migrated to Medina, it was almost 2 years after that that he had consummated the marriage with Aisha or brought her home. So if you add 2 or 3 years to 17, that would make 19 or 20. So as I said, that 19 or 20 is the age at the time of her marriage, and erroneous to justify or to say that she was 9. It was the tribal custom to marry off young ladies in those times, and hence it is absolutely okay. So this was as far as the explanation is concerned regarding the age of Ayesha. Okay, now let's move on to the third segment of our session, and this segment actually relates to offering supplication or dua or prayer for non-Muslims. And this happens so many times in our lives that we come across people who are non-Muslims, they die, and Muslims are generally told that they must not supplicate or pray or offer the dua of maghfirah, of forgiveness for non-Muslims because of the fact that they are already condemned by the Almighty, and because of the fact that the Almighty has decided not to forgive them, so therefore there is no point in asking for their forgiveness. So this has happened so many times in our lives. We have seen just recently, I think there was a famous Indian actor who had passed away, and we had this debate on the social media that whether we should pray for his forgiveness or not. A couple of years ago, I remember Stephen Hawking passing away, and I wrote a small note of obituary praying for him and asking for his forgiveness from the Almighty. And I was taken to task by many people on the social media and said that why are you praying for someone who maybe he was an atheist who never believed in God, and what right have you to pray in favor of such people? So first of all, we need to understand that as far as dua is concerned, supplication is concerned, prayer is concerned, it is just a request from you to the Almighty that if this person has any legitimate excuse of not comprehending God or not understanding the requisites of a supreme being, God be merciful to him. So it's just a request which is being made. And remember, this was the same request which once the Prophet Abraham made for his own father, and we know from the Quran that the Almighty had said that this is something which is not going to happen because of the fact that he has died on calculated disbelief. But Abraham still said that because I'm his son, I would like to present my prayer to him. So remember, the first point that you need to understand is that as far as the prayer is concerned, as far as this dua is concerned, it's just a question, it's just a request, a recommendation that you can make. So whether a person is a Muslim or a non-Muslim, in my opinion, this dua can be made regardless for any person, as long as is a human being. For a human being, you belong to his or her fraternity. Therefore, praying for a human being is something which is a natural thing that you should do, because you have to understand that God is not going to accept the prayer or dua on the basis of my recommendation or your recommendation. He is going to do whatever he thinks is in line with justice. But I think as human beings, all of us must pray in favor of all people who pass away, because as I said, it is our recommendation. And as far as the Quran is concerned, because this is also an issue which is generally raised, that because the Quran has says that the mushrikun or the idolaters of Arabia would never be forgiven for the reason that they have dishonored their commitment with God. They are polytheists, they are idolaters, and the Almighty says that they are najis, as the Quran says, which means they are filthy in their faith and they will not be forgiven. Similarly, very similar words have been related in the Quran regarding the hypocrites or the munafiqun. Again, we need to understand that these non-Muslims of the times of the Prophet, as I have explained in some of my earlier sessions, were a specific category of non-Muslims about whom the Almighty himself had conveyed to the Messenger of God, to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that these people are now deliberately denying. They have absolutely no excuse to deny, and therefore it is on the basis of my knowledge, the Almighty says that I am communicating this to you, that these are people who are condemned. I'm going to condemn them, I'm going to punish them in the hereafter, and you have no right to pray for them in this world. So this punishment which is mentioned in the Quran, as I said, is specifically meant for people in the times of the messengers of God, about whom the Almighty Himself informs His messengers whether they deserve this honor and respect of prayer or not. This cannot be made a basis for any other prayer or respect or honor or forgiveness that we offer in our times. So that what is mentioned by the Quran or in the Quran relates to a specific situation in which the Almighty Himself communicates this. Today we don't have this knowledge on behalf of the Almighty. We don't know whether a person is intentionally denying, whether he has or she has some misconception, or whether there is some misinformation. So our relationship with every single human being, whatever his status is that we are his well-wishers or her well-wishers, and therefore even when such people are alive, we will pray for them, we will wish well for them, we will go to them, we will make friends with them. You will have all kinds of relations with them, except of course those which are prohibited by our religion, that include polytheism or polytheistic practices, or maybe consuming haram food, which is not halal. But other than that, all types of social relations, and this is of course included in those social relations when you go to a person's funeral or pray for that person. So that is also a part of that fraternal relationship that you have with him or her. So I would say that this is something that you must reconsider, we must revisit. And when I say revisit, of course I'm not talking to you, but to our religious clergy who think that this is something that is unwarranted. So I think there is a counter narrative to this aspect as well, that this was unwarranted for the idolaters, for the mushrikun of the times of the Prophet, because the Almighty had stopped him from doing so. But today this is not the case, because we don't know the people around us, in what shape they are, what background they have, and why they are insisting on a particular stance. So our relationship with them has to be that of a brother or a sister. The way we wish well for them, the way we wish that good things happen to our brothers and sisters, in a very similar way we should wish that good things happen to our brothers and sisters among the non-Muslim fraternity, whether they are alive or they have passed away, in a very similar way. Right. So let's move on to the fourth and last segment before you start asking questions. And this fourth segment, my dear friends, relates to a very common issue, I think, that is all around us, and that is the issue of tattoos. Yeah. So what should be done with these tattoos that we have, or because as I do find that parents are often found very disgruntled, very unhappy when they see their children having all kinds of tattoos on all kinds of places on their bodies, and they would not feel comfortable. So let me just briefly first let you know that as far as tattoos are concerned, and the prohibition of a tattoo, as has been mentioned in a certain narrative, which I'll just explain to you. But before I do that, just let me give you a summary of what exactly has been implied and what I have understood from the sources. And that is that as long as tattoos which are not vulgar or indecent, or maybe made of things which people used to worship in olden times, of course this does not happen. This does happen in certain pagan communities even today. But as long as tattoos which are not vulgar or indecent, or they are not made of deities which are worshipped, used to be worshipped, or still are worshipped in certain countries or certain areas of the world, all other tattoos have no stamp of prohibition. So you can make all kinds of tattoos. It is entirely your choice. Obviously, as a parent, I might have my reservations if I see my child, but it does not relate to any religious reservation. It would just relate to the fact, well, you're not looking nice, so maybe you're looking a little over than you should. But again, as I said, that would not be any sort of a religious prohibition that a parent can offer, because he or she thinks that religion has stopped us from tattooing our body. It has not. And the only narrative which has come in this regard, which is generally translated as that a person who makes these tattoos and the person on whom these tattoos are made have been cursed by the Prophet. Let me tell you that this narrative has been cited, and if you, as is the general case, if you gather all the narratives of this topic, you'll find out that this has been there is a certain Quranic verse associated with this topic of tattooing in that hadith verse, and that is that very famous verse of Surah Rum, in which it is said, "La tabdila li khalqillah," which means that don't change the creation of God on which He has created you. Don't change that thing. So people thought that when it is said that don't change the creation of God, don't do this and don't do that, and the words which are used in Arabic is washima al-mustawshima. Washima means the person who makes these tattoos and engraves them, and mustawshima is the person on whom they are engraved. So they say that this curse is on the Prophet, and because of the fact that there is a certain Quranic verse which is associated. Now, if you pick up that Quranic verse and you find it in the Quran, you'll realize that the topic under discussion is polytheism, and the whole background is that the Almighty is telling us that shirk or polytheism is something which is against human nature. It is against the creation or fitrah on which the Almighty has created you, so give it up. So, La tabdila li khalqillah is the verse which is quoted in that hadith vis-a-vis that tattooing, and which immediately tells us that obviously the Prophet was telling people that if they make tattoos which of course depict deities or idols which are worshipped, then this is something which is not on, because as I said, that the verse which is quoted is the one which deals with polytheism. And La tabdila li khalqillah, the Quranic verse, does not relate to any appearance or any outward bearing. It means the nature on which the Almighty created you was monotheism, was one God, and you are corrupting your nature if you believe in more than one gods. So therefore, do not do so. So in other words, it becomes very apparent that the hadith relates to specific tattoos, those tattoos which were used in the times of the Prophet, as I said, to be worshipped for worship purposes. And because polytheism was rampant in the times of the Prophet, so therefore he said that any tattoo which is made on your body, and the purpose of that tattoo is that people actually think that the vision or the picture made or engraved is that of a deity or an idol, that will not be acceptable. And I think that's fair enough, because we would not accept any idol or a deity. But other than that, as I said, tattoos today which are made are seldom made of idols and deities, and if they are, then of course they should be refrained from. And the second thing is that there should not be any vulgarity in that aspect. And if these two aspects are taken care of, then any form of tattoo that you would like can be engraved and can be made, and it cannot be objected to. And I think parents also must realize that they might feel discomfort, or they might feel very strange when they see this, because parents have not grown up with this tattoo phenomena when they were growing up, and it seems very strange to them. But as I said, they have to realize this, that these tattoos do not bear any label of prohibition as far as religion is concerned. The only tattoo that is prohibited, as I just said, in the hadith of the Prophet, related to idol worshipping. And of course, as I said, I would add one more category to that, and that is any vulgar sort of a tattoo, which is of course another directive of religion, that vulgarity and obscenity must be abstained from. So this is how I would explain tattooing, and so I would now end this session here, and now request my co-host to please continue with the session, and now we can take questions. Thank you very much.
Dr. Shehzad, let's start the Q&A session straight away. First we have Ahmed. So Ahmed, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, sir. I had a question about the age of Aisha. I actually agree that this is a very illogical thing to conclude that she was 9, but I just wanted an answer to some contentions people bring up when we make this argument. They say that being engaged before couldn't be an argument because that was common in that time. People used to do it in infancy. And the age of Asma, they say that couldn't be an answer because there's other sources saying that she was actually 17 years older, and that it's a weak source anyway, and that can't abrogate a Sahih Hadith. So what would you say?
I would say that first of all, you need to understand that where does it say that she was 17 years old? You have to verify that. We had this custom in which younger girls would be married off, so we are not taking it as a basis of our argument, but the basis is the word that is used. The word used, if I remember correctly, is jariya, which is not used for young girls. It is always used for girls who are of marriageable age. So it is not the custom, I mean, not just the commitment made vis-a-vis as I said, the engagement. It is the word which Khala actually used for. Khala is the name of the lady who was proposing for the Prophet. So she was telling us that we have a girl of marriageable age and we have an older lady. So the word that she used for Aisha is the one that we use for a marriageable girl. And as far as the calculation is concerned, I think you need to ask them to disprove that calculation if they can. And as far as the Sahih Hadith is concerned, well, what does that Sahih Hadith actually mean? It only means that as far as Imam Bukhari is concerned, it is classified as technically Sahih. As is generally the point is generally made, Sahih and correct are not synonymous. Sahih is a technical term of Arabic which means that it conforms to certain standards. It does not mean the Sahih of Urdu or Arabic, in which it also means correct. So it means that according to Imam Bukhari, it is technically Sahih, which means that it technically conforms to a certain standard. But in spite of conforming to a certain standard, we have so many narratives of Bukhari and Muslim, which we have been discussing all around in some of our other sessions, that they need to be verified, that they must not be against the Quran, they must not be against established norms, they must not be against common sense, they must not be against established norms of sense and reason. All these are standards which our scholars of Hadith themselves have made. I'm not the one who's making them. So for example, Khatib Baghdadi is a very famous authority. If you just pick up even a translation of what he has said, you'll realize that he says that anything which is against common sense, against the Quran, against sense and reason, against history, it shall not be accepted even if the narrative is technically Sahih.
Okay, and also just asking, would you accept the argument that the hadith that says that she was playing with dolls, some people say that the reason is actually there weren't dolls per se of a child, there were like figurines that even some adults play with today.
Well, I'll not comment. I don't need to comment on that narrative, because whether she was playing or not, it's besides the point, because the fact is that when we know that she was of not that age, either the narrative is not being properly reported, or there could be some other mishap with the narrative. So I would not comment on that narrative when I know from other means that it has no basis.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. Minnie, you are up next. Please ask your question.
So I was wondering, based on the same verse that you used about that you spoke, that people misinterpret that as being for tattoos, what about people that talk about piercings and say that those are inappropriate or shouldn't be done, especially for like belly button or like eyebrows or tongue and so on?
So again, there is no such hadith which says so. All those narratives which are there, they either relate to this practice of I would say polytheism, or there was this practice of tanammus which was rampant in the times of the Prophet, in which what women would do, they would cut their hair in a certain way, in which it would dangle in front of their foreheads like here, and there would be a small space here. And that tanammus, actually the practice of tanammus, was something which the Prophet said, well, this does not look well on women. So it's like expressing a certain dislike. And then again, it was not regarding the eyebrows, or as has been generally the case to be understood, or plucking facial hair as has been understood, because the word tanammus does not refer to plucking facial hair. It refers to a certain practice in which the hair near the center of your forehead is plucked off, and there are certain certain form which is made, which does not look nice if you see the practice the way it would be done. So as I said, that either the hadiths are of these types or of the other category. But if you have a piercing in your belly button or maybe something else, again the purpose should be that are you going to show off your belly button, or is it because there's something else? Because showing off your belly button itself is something which is not recommended, which is not on. So, but if you do it for your own self, or to see it for your own self, maybe, of course, it cannot be objected to. So, similar is the case with eyebrows, and similar is the case with piercing in other parts of our body. It could be something which is detestable, I mean, to some other person, but as long as it is you're okay with it, it's fine. Also remember that there are many narratives of the Prophet in which at times the Prophet's own personal dislike is mentioned in this word, like words it says kareha. The Prophet did not like it, it did not recommend it. So again, it is like an elderly person not liking certain customs. I would also grandfather say some things to my grandchildren or my children, well, don't do like this because it doesn't look good. But again, you have to understand that there are certain things which are part of religion, and there are certain things which are part of your personal choice or your personal inclination, and you have to make a distinction between them as well.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have Ahmed Shoaib again, and he has two questions. So Ahmed, you can ask both of your questions.
Okay, sir, my first question is, basically it's to do with, you said that you shouldn't have tattoos which of polytheistic nature. That could this also relate to clothing? Because some people say that even if the Nike tick, the logo itself isn't the goddess, if the name on the branding, could that count as being polytheistic nature?
Well, I don't think so. You see, at times what happens is that these things lose their background. To give you an example, look at the days of the week. Sunday, Monday. You know, Monday means the day of the moon god. The Sunday is the day of the sun god. So we use them freely because these words have been divested of their original, the way they were coined. So I think this is just like saying something which has lost its original, I would say, the way, the reason for which they were coined. People no longer know them, and they have totally been divested of them. As I said, like the days, similarly is the case with the days of the month. So August, September, June, July, these a lot of them relate to some of the deities which were present, or to some emperors in a certain way, that you give certain amount of sanctity to that emperor. So I think that I would class them with these months of the year or these days of the week.
Okay, and my second question also was about praying for non-Muslims. It's that, what's the practical value of us recommending anything to God? Like, what will happen if we do it? What's the point?
So the point is that you express your own solidarity for that person. You see, when you go to a person's funeral, you are expressing your compassion, your sincerity with the heirs of the deceased, with the relatives of the deceased, and because of the fact that he belonged to your fraternity, the fraternity of human beings, you express your sincerity and your relationship with that person, that you are his well-wisher or her well-wisher even after his or her death. When she was or he was alive or she was alive, you were always wishing well for that person, and even now that he has or she has passed away, you still would like that good things happen to her or him. So it's like expressing something for your fraternity, and obviously it's not going to have any effect on God's decision, because God's decision is going to be based on justice. So it's like expressing our own sincerity and sympathy for that person.
Could the idea of intercession of prophets be similar? Is it just a solidarity, something like
Yes,
that?
absolutely. The intercession of the prophets themselves is something which we know from the Quran is not going to make people go to paradise simply because the prophet has signaled or requested so. If we study the Quran, you'll find out that there would be people who would have good and bad deeds almost equally, and the Almighty would be inclined actually to forgive that those people, because they would have been equal number of good or bad deeds, a very small difference between the good and bad number. And the inclination of the mercy of God would be that, okay, let's let them go and make them enter paradise. So as an honor and respect given to a personality, the Almighty will and ask, well, what do you say? Should I forgive that person? It's like bestowing honor on a prophet of God, whereas the Almighty would have in fact himself already decided that he would be forgiving. So just in order to invoke and give this honor to a messenger of God, he would ask him as if giving him respect, so that people outwardly think that people of honor and respect can intervene on behalf of people who have equal number of good or bad deeds. So in effect, it's nothing. The Almighty, as I said, would have already decided to have forgiven them. So it's again here the question is slightly different.
Thank you so much. Next question is by Amina, Zain, and Daniel. Please go ahead, ask your question.
Hi, is there any particular place on your body where you cannot get a tattoo if you wanted one?
I don't think there's any place. You can do it anywhere, as long as if you're doing it in some private place, then obviously it should not be a place that you should start showing off to other people. And again, the tattoo that is made on such a private place is preferably should be made by yourself, because in that case you would be exposing some of your private parts to some other person who is making that tattoo. So you can do it anywhere on your body, as long as if it is something which can be displayed, obviously other people can make that tattoo. But if it is made at a certain place in your body which is indecent to expose, then you should make it yourself and enjoy it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. Nadia, you are up next. Please ask your question.
Hi, I just wanted to ask, to my knowledge, the argument against tattoos is that it is unclean for prayer. I'd just like your perspective on this.
So I would say that if they have become part of your body, like for example nail polish does when you wear it on your nails. So before doing your tattoo, you should do wuzu, and then you can make a tattoo after that, and subsequently you can do wuzu on top of that tattoo.
Seems like now they are absorbing the content for the day, and perhaps next session would be more entailing. So thank you so much, and we'll see you next week, inshallah.
Okay.